And now, Rate That Album, Season 3, with Paul Muad'Dib and Joe Fremming. Two guys who know stuff. Hi, and welcome back to Rate That Album, the back and forth podcast album review with myself, Paul Muad'Dib, and my wonderful good friend, Joe Fremming. Joe, how are you doing, sir?
Well, Paul, I find it kind of funny. I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had.
Yeah, you know what? I can totally empathize with that in this dumbest timeline that we live in, Joe. That's right, folks. We are doing Tears for Fears' debut album from 1983, The Hurting. This was a fan request, and as always, we're going to start this off, and we do fan requests by giving our disclaimer. Joe, you and I are going to show no bias towards this album, are we?
No. Why would we?
Nope. Exactly. You asked for our opinion. You wanted us to talk about it. So there you go. So you'll be getting our real, unadulterated, unfiltered thoughts, and appreciate, as always, having people come up and be like, hey, I really love to hear you guys talk about this album. So that means the world. Joe, how familiar
Junior?
Today, Junior. How familiar were you with Tears for Fears, the band, and then this album specifically?
Paul, I was born in 81. Tears for Fears were fucking everywhere.
They really were.
But mostly the songs I know are from I believe the follow-up album, Music from the Big Chair.
Music from the Big Chair. Songs from the Big Chair.
Songs from the Big Chair, yeah. So I was more familiar with that stuff than the songs on here. In fact, there's only one song on here I really knew. And we'll get into it because I know it mostly because of the cover.
Got it. And I will say I was familiar with this one, with Songs from the Big Chair, but also I was a big fan of the Seeds of Love. I really was. And not a lot of people were. I digged it. So yeah, Tears for Fears for me is like a great band. Like I remember they were on MTV, they were everywhere. You could not get away from Tears for Fears. But yeah, I mean, Shout, Mother's Talk, Everyone Wants to Rule the World off of Songs from the Big Chair, Head Over Heels, I Believe. Those were all singles off of that album. In this album, which is interesting that you were only familiar with the one, and I know which one you're talking about, because there were several singles off of this album.
Yeah, but they only tracked in the UK. They weren't really big over here.
Exactly. Yes.
I'm not a British man, Paul. We've been over this.
Yes. Mad World, Changes, and Pale Shelter, all of which reached the top 5 in the UK and the top 40 internationally. There was a version of Suffer the Children, really big, again, in the UK. There was some of it here, but not as much. But I also think because, again, when this album came out specifically, we were still really young. You and I were like 4 or 5 when this album came out.
I was 83. I was 2 years old.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, we were 2, but the album reached platinum in 1985. So I'm just saying, we were 4 years old when this hit its platinum peak. Yeah. And then
I was not aware of a whole lot of things at 4 years old.
Dude, I unfortunately was, but that's a whole different thing for therapy. Hey, Joe, speaking of therapy, did you know that Tears for Fears whole kind of thing was built around therapy?
Yeah, I was listening to this album, I realized British people have a lot of hang-ups about growing up, especially their childhood. Like between this and Roger Waters, I mean, Jesus, fuck. John Lennon, God, just fucking let it go, people.
Tony Banks being a dick all the time.
The world's not your therapist, people, all right?
So, well, it is for Tears for Fears, you see. This album is considered a loose concept album focusing around child abuse, psychological trauma, and depression. Joys! Despite the fact that with that subject matter, this became a giant album for them. Tears for Fears themselves, their name came from a psychologist by the name of Arthur Yanoff, who wrote a book in the 70s called The Primal Scream. And his whole philosophy when it came to treating mental illness was through repeatedly descending into and feeling and experiencing long repressed childhood pain. He felt that through diving back into that, allowing yourself to feel that pain, having the Tears for Fears, the song Shout off their second album is actually another technique out of that book. That's where they had their whole kind of thing through this.
And if people think this therapy is familiar, if you know anything about John Lennon, that's what he did post the Beatles breakup was Primal Scream therapy.
Primal's,
which is really influenced his first solo album, Plastic Ono Band.
Yes, absolutely. So they're not the only ones to have done this. The band, pretty much it was Kurt Smith and Roland. I'm gonna butcher his name. Orzabal. Orzabal. Are like the two main frontrunners in the band, obviously.
They're the only real members. Like, I think studio musicians and touring people make up the music, but I think basically they're it, right?
Well, at this point, there was Manny Elias and Ian Stanley that were involved.
Oh, the famous Ian Stanley, huh?
Yeah. They were involved up until about 1986. Manny left, and then 1987 Ian left, and then for a short period of time, it was actually just Roland doing things in the 90s, and then Kurt came back, and it's just been a duo ever since they got their reunion back.
I would always consider them a duo. I mean, you never saw the other chuckleheads in the videos and stuff. It's always these two guys.
Well, by the time, by the time we were seeing them in the videos, like Seeds of Love and Shout and things like that. I mean, you did see other members in Shout, but really the ones that stuck out to me, which again is that video, Seeds of Love. I remember that video very, very vividly, and it's only the two of them. So there you go. But yeah, Kurt especially was influenced by Arthur, and Roland not necessarily going along with just kind of the chorus, but also realized they needed to do that. He needed to get some kind of therapy as well. So to kind of talk about this, Kurt and Roland meet as teenagers, and they were in a band called Graduate, which was a mod revival type of thing.
People want to know, like, mod revival. Listen to The Jam is pretty much a mod revival.
Yes.
Just the context of what.
Sorry, I forget that. Yeah, it's like it's like a Brit pop punk type of
stuff. Like bands in the 70s are trying to do early Who kind of shit. So.
Yes, exactly. So that's where they got their start as this band Graduate. They released a single called Elvis Should Play Ska, which was a tongue-in-cheek reference to Elvis Costello, not Elvis Presley. They split up in 1981. They became session musicians for the band Neon, where they met their drummer, Manny Elias. Neon also featured Pete Byrne and Rob Fisher, who went on to do Naked Eyes. Well, Neon broke up, and here they're back together, Kurt and Roland, and they have Manny. And so Roland starts going, hey guys, we should really do something with this. He takes over a lot of the writing portions of it, and you can hear it on this album. We'll talk about it, but their big influences that Roland says were Talking Heads, Peter Gabriel, and Brian Eno. Are you shocked? No. No. And they were really into Gary Newman, Depeche Mode, and OMD. Again, shocker.
Oh, and Duran Duran. Don't forget, there's a lot of Duran Duran influences on here too.
There's a lot of Duran Duran. Well, what happened was, so after John Lennon became Yanov's patient in 1970, they met knowing what you talked about, where, hey, Lennon went and saw this primal therapy guy. They went and met him in the 80s, and they were so involved with him, Joe. They said he had become, quote, Hollywood, and wanted the band to write a musical for him. And they're like, oh no, like, this is not what we want to do. So they were kind of just, again, don't meet your heroes, people. So yeah, that's kind of where they went. They started with The Hurting, got their international success from that. Really, Songs from the Big Chair was the big one. They were in Live Aid, which you and I have covered somewhat, but didn't go too much into.
We did the best of the two greatest performances of Live Aid. One legitimately great, and one. Whew, all right, we already talked about.
Yes, that was rough. So all these things go on, and then they break up after Seeds of Love. It wasn't a great falling out. There was bankruptcy involved. There was perfectionist lifestyles. There was just a kind of a change, and they're like, fuck it. And you know how that goes. Well, British people are typically notoriously polite people. So they got back together in like 2000. And now, I mean, since 2020, they're still going. And they just released last year a double live album. They appeared on the public radio in BBC, and they have a summer tour that they did this year. And there's talk about them doing another album. So that should be really interesting. So that's kind of where Tears of Fears in a nutshell. But we're going to be focusing on their debut album, The Hurting. Joe, what is your overall take on The Hurting to start with?
Fantastic songs, produced to death is my take on this. These are fantastic songs in which it's gooped over with so much 80s drum machine and keyboard bass and all that. And I mean, at one point I was having visions of Dewey Cox from Walk Hard yelling, "I need 50,000 didgeridoos," you know. Yeah, like, again, these are great songs, but for me, I really struggled with the production of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those sticking points, like what we bring up is when albums sound dated, and like I think we give a fair leash with that with a lot of artists.
Yeah.
This one was hard to get past the 80s sound and 80s production. This sounds very much what everybody was doing at this time in the 80s. I mean, this sounds like Duran Duran. It sounds like Flock of Seagulls. It sounds like, but the frustrating part is the lyrics and the songs are so good that I feel like the production didn't do them any favors.
What's really interesting here is the producers were Chris Hughes, who is best known, I think, for a lot of people as the drummer for Adam and the Ants. He has done many things. He's worked with Robert Plant, Paul McCartney, Peter Gabriel, Wang Chung. I mean, you name it, Tori Amos. He's probably Enya, a lot of things. And the other one was Ross Collum, who is known for also working with Adam and the Ants, Wang Chung, but this one I don't think will surprise you. He did God damn it, I can see it right in front of me. He did Rufus Wainwright, and I think you can kind of hear a little bit of that in the Human League and things like that. Also, Kate Bush. He did a lot of working with Kate Bush. So I think what you had at this time is exactly what you're talking about. I believe this was around the time that, for better or worse, Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins got in a studio together for Peter Gabriel's solo album and came up with the gated drums. And that gated drums became the sound for the 80s. And that is very heavy on this album. There's a song we'll get to in particular that is actually almost verbatim drum-wise a song from Genesis. So I think we should just jump right into it, don't you think, Joe?
Yep.
All right, so let's start with the first track, the title track, The Hurting. Joe, what was your feelings on The Hurting?
It felt like Flock of Seagulls at first. It's the production and honestly the drumming too, Paul. The drumming, like you said before, very much the Phil Collins, but a lot of times the drumming also is not fitting the tone of the lyrics. So like you kind of have like these dour lyrics, but you have this like doom, 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 like this really upbeat drum beat, and I was very confused. Very, very confused. I mean, again, if you strip all this goop off, The Hurting is a fantastic song. Unfortunately, we don't have a stripped down version of this, so this is what we got.
I know I struggle. We both have talked about this. We struggle with that 80s sound, right? Like, again, when you listen to Cyndi Lauper, you were like, oh no. And then you were like, wait a minute, I didn't know there was 80s bands out there, early 80s bands out there that sounded good. You know, they didn't have that thing. I do feel like this falls into it. It's a weird equation for me, but I equate it almost to Oingo Boingo for me with this album, that there's these weird off the wall quirky things that the band does, yet I am here for it. I feel like it works really well. I think if the lyrics themselves were not as strong, I wouldn't be feeling that way. But when I hear like what they're doing and I get kind of this vibe of it's playful, it's whimsical, yet it's dark and it's punching you, I feel like that's so intelligent. And it lulled a lot of people in. I mean, you get lyrics, that are like, is a horrific dream? Am I sinking fast? Could a person be so mean as to laugh and laugh? On my own, could you ease my load? Could you see my pain? Could you please explain the hurting? Get in line with the things you know. Feel the pain, feel the sorrow. Touch the hurt and don't let go. Learn to cry like a baby. Then the hurting won't come back. This is some really cerebral, deep, dark shit. And yet you got this. And it's that juxtaposition. I dig it. I really do. Absolutely.
I think it's just fucking terrible. Like, I like the juxtaposition when it's done by They Might Be Giants and other bands, because there's like a sense of humor with those people where like they're kind of in on this thing. Like Violent Femmes does the same thing. Here, these guys are not very. These are kind of two humorless guys putting the quirks in, which really just, again, it's so distracting to me. And I'm hearing better songs buried under the goop and synth and all that, so this whole thing is just frustrating to me because I don't. And again, I hate Oingo Boingo. I fucking
there you go.
Oingo Boingo. Yeah. So this is not helping me in any way, shape, or form.
And I will say there is definitely, again, when you listen to how serious they're being and you listen to the arrangement, I think to me it adds to the situation as well. Like, I'm listening to it as a whole, and there's just something. I've listened to this album over and over throughout the years, actually, and so I was really glad when a fan was like, "I'm like, yeah, of course I'll do it because this is going to be an easy review." But we will get to where I feel like it falls apart, because at some point it does, and we will get there.
I mean, this is imagine listening to The Wall, but instead of like Pink Floyd, you had nothing but the music of Tears from a Clown by Smokey Robinson. Like, yeah, I mean, just it's like, not for me, Paul, not for me.
I get it.
So you thought you
might like to go to a show. Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. I get it. It's I no, it's like, taking a really dense college thesis level psychology and dumping it into a porch radio song. I get it. I get it. I get it. Next, we get Mad World. Joe, I know you got a lot to say about this. Just take it away.
Yeah, it's the cover that's in the Donnie Darko soundtrack by Gary Jules is a lot better. It fits the tone of the lyrics. And here, like, we're a kazoo away from circus music. It's just, it doesn't do. It's like they're making a pop song when they should have made this like a ballad, which I don't understand why they did it. So, like, yeah, it does not work for me, this arrangement. Like, I'll listen to the cover any day of the week over this.
It's weird to me, and I will say that I do feel Gary Jules' cover is quite fantastic. It really is a great way to take the song. And I think Tears for Fears really missed their calling. I think
when they did the song live for a few years, they did that arrangement of it.
Yes, they did. Absolutely. And you showed me earlier the duet with Kurt and his daughter doing that arrangement on guitar, and it's beautiful. It's so good. It's so fucking good.
Yeah, it's a great song. Again, like, underneath all the goop are these fantastic songs that I love, and it's a struggle for me to try to block out the indulgence of, like, turning every fucking knob in the studio all the way up to 11. So
I will say, though, I tend to, again, lean towards versions of songs that I heard the first version, right? And I did hear the Mad World, this version, before the Gary Jules. Now, Gary Jules took that song and made it something that was fantastic. It really is a good cover. I think it charted better even than this version. So a lot of people would go on that route, and I can't.
I think most people know the Gary Jules, especially in the States. I would say, especially because Donnie Darko was such a cult classic. Like, everybody, like, our age, like, at some point owned that DVD. I think it's just I have a feeling a lot of people our age are probably more familiar with that version than the original.
I would completely agree with you on that. That I feel that absolutely in the stateside here, I think more people are familiar with the Gary Jules. I will say there is something, again, I do like that juxtaposition, but as I was going to say is I feel like Tears for Fears really missed their calling, as I think they would have been really successful as writing music for other bands.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was like their calling. That's really what they should have done and should really start doing, is taking these songs and writing it for other bands. I think that would be amazing. I'm sure they have a vault somewhere of a bunch of songs. Start selling them. But you got wonderful lyrics, though. I mean, most people know the Gary version, the Gary Jules version. All around me are familiar faces, worn out places, worn out faces, bright and early for the daily races, going nowhere. And their tears are filling up their glasses. No expression. Hide my head. I want to drown my sorrow. No tomorrow. And then you get, and the chorus in this is so different. Like, if you guys have not heard this version but are familiar with Gary, go and listen to it.
It's jarring. See, I'm pretty sure I heard the Gary Jules version first, and so I was used to that. And then the first time I heard this version, because I think I heard the Gary Jules, and then I went and listened to this version, and I started laughing at the production of this. Like, why would they do that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I find it kind of funny. I find it kind of and it's totally different. But in this, it's still, for me, like, I can hear the Gary Jules version, and I think I understand what they were trying to do, but I realize that this is not a lot of people's thing. Like, I totally get where a lot of people look at this and say exactly what you're saying. So I'm not disputing that at all. But yeah, I would say if you haven't heard this version of it, check it out. Next up, we got Pale Shelter. I was listening to like the deluxe version, and it was Pale Shelter second version.
Yeah, that's what I had too.
Yeah. What did you think of this one, Joe?
It was all right. Again, I'm loving the lyrics and I love the melodies and I love like they have like these really interesting like little guitar riffs or like riffs. I don't even know if it's on guitar, but maybe on keyboard. That again, if they would have allowed the songs to breathe and maybe like knock out like 75% of the instrumentation going on, it would have allowed these songs to like soar a little bit better. So again, it's another frustrating moment for old Joe listening to this one too.
Yeah, I will say this song, I think specifically really shows the early of what was going to become songs from the Big Chair.
Yeah, this song, and I would say this, and later on with "Watch Me Bleed."
Yes.
Like, here's the thing: when you go to like songs of the Big Chair, a lot of the impulses, production-wise, on this album are reeled back. So I think they knew a bit. They went a little maybe too far on this one.
I think they
people like me are like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah. I think because you can kind of hear some of the pop sensibilities, but you could tell they're doing some of these odd things with it. But there's definitely pop sensibility here. And when you get to
sensibilities, there's like these little riffs throughout these songs that are just like so catchy, but then they get buried in the mix.
I would gonna completely agree with you on that one. Absolutely. Again, the lyrics are so good. How can I be sure when your intrusion's my illusion? How can I be sure when all the time you change your mind? I ask for more and more. How can I be sure when you don't give me love, you give me pale shelter? When you don't give me love, you give me cold hands. I mean, there is so much going on here. And I love actually like this is I always feel like it's going to be a good album for me. And this is just anecdotal, like just coincidental. There's no real data behind it. But when I like the third track on an album, if that's a solid song to me, I'm typically going to like the album as a whole. The guitar and everything, I feel like really adds to what's going on to it.
I wish they would have stuck more with, and again, this is just my opinion, but I wish they would have stuck more with just spare it down a bit, you know, like there's such interesting instrumentation going on, then it just gets overblown with like synth and keyboard and like synth version of slap bass for some reason. Like I'm just like, what the fuck is going on?
I would say there's a lot of over ambition on this album, and it's kind of funny when you realize just how serious they were taking themselves throughout it, and just how silly some of it ended up becoming. But God, you know, so next you get Ideas as Opiates, which is also a thing right out of Arthur Yanoff's Therapy.
I'm not gonna lie, Paul, the smugness in this track alone, as soon as the vocals kicked in, I laughed out loud so hard I started crying.
Okay.
I'm just picturing the guy in the studio with his little sweater, and he's not touching the microphone. He's got his hands balled up in little fists, and he's getting all emotional about it. And I'm just like, fucking fuck you.
Joe, I gotta say,
like, fuck off, man.
I gotta say, I don't think you're wrong about that being exactly what happened in this.
His all coiffed, you know. He's all like, "The song's important."
No, this
is an important song, Kurt.
This is the song that I feel is a direct, I wouldn't say a ripoff, but it definitely is very inspired by Genesis's song off of The Duke. It's a song called it's called Vocal. What is it? Guide Vocal. It's a short 1 minute song, but the exact drum that you're hearing, that boop 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 boop, boop, boop. That is the drum that is used in that song. It's almost the exact same beat that it's being used as. This is one that is completely inspired by Genesis. And if you're familiar with the song, it feels more like an imitation than it does a homage. Yeah, say what you want, say what you want, say what you will, say what you want, because I find you think what makes it easier, and I find you think what makes it easier. There's, lies on spread on lies. We don't care. Belief is our relief. We don't care. This suffers to me from like my biggest pet peeve, Joe, which is the same lyrics over and over.
Surprised they didn't upset you with Mad World.
Mad World.
We get it, man. It's a mad world. Mad world. Why you keep saying
it is, but I mean, there's a lot that's being said there, whereas like,
yeah, this is
just the same thing being said over and over, and it's a very sparsely arranged song,
and hilariously sung. Like it's like just break, and then like on repeated listenings, Paul. Like as soon as that anticipation when something's funny going to happen in a movie that you enjoy, and you just can't hold it in because it's coming. Like on repeated listenings, as soon as this started, like I'm just laughing. Like the tears are coming back again. Just picturing this guy in the studio. Like, it's an important song. What's so important to say?
So, all right, Joe. Moving on, getting into controversial territory here because that's what we do on this show. Memories fade. Joe, what'd you think of this one?
It was good. Again, I have to dig through the goop to hear the song. I wasn't paying attention to the lyrics because I was so distracted by the circus music.
Well, interesting, because you're a big fan of Heartbreak, 808s and Heartbreak, right?
Kanye?
Yeah.
I didn't like that album, no.
Okay. His song Coldest Winter samples the lyrics and production of this song. Kanye used this song on that for Coldest Winter.
Well, probably bought them each nice lake homes, Paul. So I'm pretty sure 808 and Heartbreak probably sold more than this album. So,
well, they both went platinum. I don't know. So we could do a comparison later. I'll get you that information next podcast. I do like this one. I can see. I have my issues. We all have our issues. Kanye, or Ye, as he wants to be called right now.
I don't give a shit what he wants to be called.
I don't give a fuck.
He's either. Kanye West. He's King Chucklehead of the idiots.
Pretty much, yes. You and I are in agreement about our disdain for Kanye as a person, as a sampler, as a producer. He's very talented.
Yeah. Geniuses can also be pieces of shit, people.
100%.
Music is filled with pieces of shit geniuses. Look at Phil Spector, John Lennon, David Bowie, Lou Reed.
Gary Glitter.
Every band you've ever liked probably has a piece of shit genius behind it.
100%. Yeah. So I could see, I actually totally get like this being one of like how Kanye can get weird with his samples and things like that. I'm totally not surprised that he used this. I mean, the lyrics are also very, very strong on this album, on this song, excuse me. There's only need. I love your need. I'm losing me. I cannot see the reason for the pain. With hungry joy, I'll be your toy. Just hoping you will play. Without the hope, my body starts to fail. Memory fades, but the scars still linger. Goodbye, my friend, while I love forever. I cannot grow. I cannot move. I cannot feel my age. There's such a maturity to the lyrics that have just this, their arrangement and their music hasn't caught up to like God, if you just written some of this stuff for other people and honed yourself a little bit more, I think this would have been better received over here in the States.
Or strip it down a bit.
Yeah, there you go.
Again, just strip the music. Because I think they're both, solid musicians and solid singers. It's just
Mm-hmm.
the indulgence of the studio. And that's a problem with a lot of bands in the 80s. They all became navel gazers and overthought everything, and that's why a lot of music just became just kind of stupid in the late 70s into the 80s, because people are just way overthinking and spending way too much time in the studio. Case in point, Steely Dan.
I like Steely Dan, but
I
yeah.
like Steely Dan, but like, when they are spending like a month on like a guitar track, it gets a little excessive.
And I think a lot of that indulgence with the 80s was the fact that there was all this new technology, and the fact that they were moving from tape to digital, where it became cheap to be able to do that, where before you kind of had to go with what the tape let you do. Like there was a cost expenditure there. And I think a lot of people, they realize, holy shit, we can just re-record forever and it doesn't cost us a goddamn thing. I think you saw a lot of people start to move towards that perfectionist, overdubbing, over correcting thing that kind of took over the 80s there. And really it wasn't until, like the rebirth of punk and things like that, where people wanted to hear those mistakes. They wanted to hear the glips and the garbles and the more realness in the music. There is that period there, especially from about 82, 83 to about 88, 89, that a majority of artists fall into, that is just overly done in that manner.
Just the production is so slick and sheen, and I mean, obviously there was going to be a backlash to that, and grunge was one of those, and I think lo-fi sampling hip hop was another reaction to a lot of that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, get back to real. It's like what Jay-Z said. You're T-Paining too much. So Suffer the Children, Joe. Oh my God,
this is another Paul. I'm starting to realize the songs that Roland sang on made me laugh, like, unintentionally, because I feel like, again, he went back in the studio with his coiffed little mullet and his little sweater vest, and he balled his fists up, and he's like, "I'm going to sing an important song," and then it ended up with me laughing. Just like this and Ideas as Opiates. I mean, I'm just like unintentionally just hilarious to me.
It's such a heavy song, though, dude. It really
is heavy. Again, strip it down, maybe get a different vocalist. It would be a lot better for me, because again, the lyrics are really strong, really tight. It just, I don't know why they're going off in these weird like synth pop directions, where it's just like, let's put everything in the kitchen sink into this production, and really takes from the songs.
If you look at what was going on at the time in 83, especially in the UK, this was kind of a thing. And I think that's why this fits so well. And I think part of what Stratus, pushed them along to have those, 3 successful albums afterwards, because each one of their albums was very successful, was the fact that it was the lyrical content. UK is very different than the States. Like, and I'm going to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole in terms of, you've seen the documentary In the Shadows of Motown, where no one in the States knew who was the session musicians for a lot of the Motown stuff, for Marvin Gaye and all that stuff. But when they went over to the UK, there were signs with their names on it and things like that. They've always been a little bit more keen into the meanings and that type of thing of the music. So I think they kind of gravitated, as I have, and I think you as well, to the lyrical side of it, and went, wow, there's something here. And then when they came out with Songs from the Big Chair, it was like, hey, that's what we want. You guys are giving us what we want now. So yeah, I just think that's what it is. And I just think they were falling into that early 80s UK sound. Again, Adam and the Ant-Man, go back and listen to that and listen to this, and you'll hear a lot of the almost this very similar sound arrangement production issues.
Yep. Same with Duran Duran and
yep.
Flock of Seagulls. And the difference here being, and I'll stress this, Tears and Fears had stronger songs than either of those bands that I've mentioned. Unfortunately, in my critique of this is they unfortunately went with that sound, which really did not fit. Like, again, I think they figured it out a little better when it came to songs from the Big Chair, as opposed to this. This I felt like they were taking serious songs, and I don't know if maybe it was the label pushing it that they needed singles and hits because of most of the '80s. That might have hampered the production of like and arrangements of these songs. I'm just spitballing here, but that's how I would probably. That would be my guess.
I would completely agree with you. I think absolutely. I mean, I think the studio wanted them to absolutely go for hits and singles again in that time in the 80s. There was still kind of that, that mini little war between the UK and the US, about the different sounds and what was coming out, almost like what we saw with the Beatles and the Who, the British invasion type of thing. I think there's some of that going on. Phonogram Records in 1981, they were having they were kind of a big thing. And then they kind of run into their own issues with Philip Records. Anyways, the point is, I mean, this is the label that Zappa was on. This is the label that a couple, other big things are on. So yeah, they needed those singles. So absolutely. I think you're nailed it with that, Joe. And a lot of these songs, I mean, when you look at the lyrics of this, these should not be singles. You know what I mean?
No, and I for me, it would have resonated better if the songs themselves are allowed to breathe. They're just being suffocated by production.
Yep, by that, get it out, 1983, get in a club and get it going.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. It's so, that's my 2 cents.
I do not disagree with your 2 cents at all, sir. The lyrics are very heavy on this one. Like, this is rough.
These songs are so fucking strong, Paul. Again,
they are.
That's what makes it so frustrating for me.
I get it.
I gravitate towards songs from the Big Chair because, again, that's all that shit I'm complaining about is reined in quite a bit.
Yeah, no, these songs are they are actually really good songs. I mean, it's a saddest fair when there's no one there. He calls out in the night, and it's so unfair. At least it seems that way when you gave him his life. And then you get to the chorus, and all this time it's been getting you down. You ought to pick him up when there's no one around and convince him, just talk to him, because he knows in his heart you won't come home soon. He's an only child in his room, and he's dependent on you, Jesus Christ, Roland, I just want to hug you. What happened to you as a child? Are you okay? You had a rough childhood, didn't you, Roland? Yeah, absolutely. It's tough. It's tough. Next, Joe, Watch Me Bleed. This is one you enjoyed.
Yeah, this is my favorite song because I think
for
me the production's reined in a bit. It's reined in and it's allowed to breathe a bit more than the other songs. It does not include a random saxophone solo. Like I believe that was Ideas as Opiates had.
Ideas as Opiates is such a bizarre song.
What the fuck is going on?
Yeah, it's such a bizarre song.
But this was my favorite song. Yeah, I felt it was just like it was. This is kind of like where I saw like, okay, they kind of have an idea where they're going next.
I have a feeling that this song and Pale Shelter were like some of the later songs that they recorded for the album. I feel like that this, because again, those two equate more so to what who's getting songs from the Big Chair. So yeah, great lyrics here as well. Heaven comes to he who waits, but I know I'm getting nowhere, and all the deeds of yesterday have really helped pave my way. Though there's no one near me now, how come everyone can touch me? You see the torture on my brow relates to neither here nor now. Watch me bleed, bleed forever. Although my face is straight, it lies, my body feels the pain and cries. Like, Jesus Christ. Like, again, I get why the goth kids were all about this shit, man. It's fucking torturous, and I'm here for it. And we get back, again, when we're denied the hurting, we're getting back to the name of the album. Again, it's kind of this, I get the concept album of what they're going through. It feels like it's like a birth to death type of situation. Like, this is all the different forms of trauma in the order it came, type of thing. So yeah. Next we get Change. This was another big hit in the UK. Joe, what'd you think of it?
Yeah.
I knew with this one. I knew it.
Great lyrics, but fuck, man, that production. Just, whew.
Yeah.
Is this where you at least concede the production went a little too far, Paul?
This is where I went, maybe this shouldn't have had all these tracks on the album. This is about
maybe need all the instruments on this album, Paul.
I think they were trying to go for like a weird Phil Spector wall of sound. And I don't know which producer it was that's like, I'm going to be the next Phil Spector, but not shoot my wife. So yeah, there's a lot going on this. Yeah, this is where I went, oh boy. And this was the 4th single. So it resonated with people. I get it. I mean, I do like it again, but I'm with you on this one. Like, there's a good song in here. This should have been handled a little bit differently. But again, I'm here for the quirks and the seriousness with the juxtaposition of how the music.
I don't even think that quirks and juxtapositions was intentional, Paul. I think that was a production choice.
I do think it was.
You know what I mean? Like, they might be giants. That's intentional. Yeah. This was like the producer's like, no, man, we need hits. Let's do another line.
Let's do another line. I mean, you sing about your dark childhood, and I'll make it sound like Christmas. Yeah.
This is like proof positive there was too much cocaine in the 80s. Too much.
Yeah, but again,
and it's followed by Exhibit B of too much cocaine.
We'll get to Exhibit B real quick here. Yeah, you walk into the room. I just had to laugh. The face you wore was cool. You were a photograph, but it's all too late. I did not have the time. I did not have the nerve to ask how you feel. Is this what you deserve? There is this really good thought process here, but then you get into where I have issues with everything, Joe, and that is change, you can change, you can change, over and over and over. My God, please stop hitting me over the head with the same fucking lyrics. Switch it up a little bit. So, then we get Prisoner, Joe.
Oh, God, this is what my biggest complaints just kind of get knocked to like a million. This was just bad. This was a bad song, Paul. I mean, it's like a Zack Snyder movie. It just assaults all my senses. Like, why are you doing this to me? And frankly, I'm just going to pretend this song never existed. There's only one song called The Prisoner. It was done by Iron Maiden.
Well, I kind of get a vibe, Joe, with this one. This was kind of inspired by The Wall. I mean, you look at the lyrics of it, here behind the wall, I feel so small. Now, this is 83. I don't even think The Wall had come out yet.
Oh, Wall came out 79.
The Wall came, yeah, I'm thinking the movie. You're right. Yes, 79. The movie came out in 85. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes. So, yeah, I mean, absolutely. This is, and the way, it's The Prisoner and the kind of goofiness of it is, I think they really thought, look, we got this concept album. Let's do a bunch of cocaine and make a song that's going to be like The Trial, and we're going to be awesome. And it does this one. I enjoy it for what it is. Like, I really do. Like, I can listen to this song and kind of sit back and be like, oh, Tears for Fears. But as like a serious song, like as a critiquer, I gotta go. I'm with you on that one. I gotta go from a critic standpoint. Woof. This is a whiffer, boys.
Just stop.
Yeah, this one should have been left. I mean, as a critic, it should have been left off the album. As a Tears for Fears fan and a fan of this album, I'm like,
it's the musical equivalent of shitting your bed, It just makes everybody feel gross.
Yeah. Then you get Start of the Breakdown, which was the original ending for the album. What'd you think of this one?
I don't remember it, Paul. I was so upset by The Prisoner.
How did I know you're going to say that?
My senses were so assaulted that I was just like, oh, I guess there's this other song, and it just kind of happened, and then I went and took an angry shit.
I cannot argue that. I've been there in that position. There have been albums you and I have talked about that when once after a track has gone on, it's like, nope, I'm out. Yeah, I think it's honestly a strong ending. And it gets overshadowed by The Prisoner. I would not be surprised if a lot of people.
I have no memory of it. It tells you just how bad The Prisoner is.
I think that probably a lot of people back in the day got to The Prisoner and stopped the record.
Yeah, there's took the needle off. Like, nope.
Yep, took the needle off. We're like, I'm okay. That's good enough, boys. Scratch the ice, let the telephone ring. Sense of time is a powerful thing, and we love to laugh, love to cry. Half alive, we love to go slow when we're dancing in the rain. Dry skin flakes when there's ice in the veins. We love to cry. Half alive. Is this the start of the breakdown? Very intelligent lyrics here. Very wonderful imagery of what a breakdown is, and the questioning of your sanity when the breakdown is happening. Just wonderful lyric, and it's unfortunate that it got put right after Prisoner. So then you got Change, the new version. I don't really want to go into all of those, Joe.
No, they're just remixes and longer versions of the songs with even worse production on them. So
I mean, Mad World remix isn't. It's just, again, it's just kind of there. I mean, Pale Shelter long version. Actually, it's a 7-minute version. I do enjoy that long version. The Way You Are has a good long version, but I just don't. I mean, I tend to like to look at things from like what the album was versus getting into some of those, like we didn't do it with the Miley thing. We didn't do it with a lot of other ones. So I would say, if you're a fan of these ones and you're a fan of those songs, by all means, again, Pale Shelter.
They're not new songs. We've already heard these songs. They're just remixes or extended mixes or whatever. I mean, they're not really adding anymore. In fact, they're probably doing more damage to my opinion of this album than anything.
I do like some of the, I mean, Joe, I know we're differing in this one. I like that weird arrangements that go along with these songs. So again, a longer version of Pale Shelter works for me, and The Way You Are works for me. But I get where it doesn't. I get where it does not for other people. So, Joe, let's talk about the aftermath here before we get into our things. How well did this album perform? Did really, really well. As we talked about, it went platinum. And I got to pull back up here because it got deleted. There we go. There's my notes. It also got blown up. It also got blown the fuck up by people. All Music gave it 4.5 stars. Line of Bitfest gave it 8 out of 10. Mojo 4 out of 5. Pop Matters 8 out of 10. Q 4 out of 5. Record Collector 4 out of 5. Rolling Stone 3 out of 5. Smash Hits Uncut 8 out of 10. Like overall, it's very, very favorable. However, there has been Mojo, Dan, Alex, fuck him, just Danny of Mojo. You know who you are. I'm not pronouncing your last name. Quote, has there ever been a more thoroughly miserable mainstream pop album than The Hurting? Even when it's up-tempo, it's somber, and it's most musically adventurous. It's a cavernous minimalism of ideas as opiates, and the gnarly dissonance of The Prisoner is an almost unbearable bereft. But in essence, it was pop. Yeah, there were people that didn't. Trent Reznor, though, Smashing Pumpkins and Arcade Fire have all come out and said this album was an influence on them. Same with Kanye. Weekend on the song Sheltered Pale Shelter on his song Secrets from the Starboy album. So there's been the legacy of this album has grown. This is, again, one of those things where your favorite artists love this album. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about that, where that can be very difficult for you as a fan.
Yeah. You can hear the influences on this album on others, but they kind of reined it in a bit. Like when I was listening to this, it reminded me of parts of, because there was a, before Pretty Hate Machine, Reznor had a demo version of Pretty Hate Machine where it was very synth pop like this. So like I definitely have heard this influence on him before. So
yes, yes, absolutely. I'm gonna go with Dave Frick here for a little bit, Joe, and I'm gonna talk going back to 1983, his July 7th, 1983 review of Tears for Fears, where he talks about, where basically he sums his thing up with, Tears for Fears may be too concerned with their own petty traumas. Wow, harsh, David. But it is a testimony to their refined pop instincts that they managed to produce this much pleasure from the pain. Yeah, this took a lot of people, again, in the U.S. here, very strong. They even considering it to a strong, quote, disco pulse to the album. And an imitation of Joy Division at best. So this was a very mixed review album. It was very polarizing, I think. I think as the years have gone on, it's become very, very favorable. But at the time of its release, you either loved it or hated it. And I think you and I being here looking at this thing, I loved it. Joe?
Not a huge fan of it, Paul.
Yeah, there you go. So
I don't hate it because, again, I like the songs. It's just the execution was left a lot to be desired.
Absolutely, no, 100. And again, I'm not going to dispute that thing for you. Just for me, I enjoy the quirkiness and the sounds of it, and like again, listening to these really dark, macabre, traumatic lyrics with this silly, goofy, trying to be serious but failing our arrangement and accompaniment to it, and I'm there for it. I love it. So let's get to Joe. How would you recommend Tears for Fears: The Hurting?
Yeah, you know what, I would, because the songs are strong. I would advise people, though, if this is going to be your first time listening to Tears for Fears, do not listen to this album. Go to songs from The Big Chair first, and then go back to this, because the production is at times overwhelmingly obnoxious, and you kind of like, and I can see how that turns people off. So I would go to that album first and then circle back to this one.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm not going to dispute that. I think I would recommend actually doing that. I personally, again, we talked about this, how you thought it was crazy that I went back to Pink Floyd's first album and went in order. I bought them in order, and most people wouldn't do that.
Well, most people would stop after a while. After Uma Guma would be like, I'm not listening to this fucking shit anymore. No, because I knew good stuff was coming, so I just really wanted to experience it. And I do that a lot with artists. Like when I know there's something really good out there, I'll go back to their early stuff and start there and work my way to the good stuff, because I enjoy following that progression with the band of like, okay, this is what they started like. Okay, now I can hear the evolution. Like I wanted to experience that. With Tears for Fears, here's the thing. They really only had the three major albums. Yes, there was other things out there, but most of that was just Roland solo work. And so you can't really call that a true Tears for Fears album. Really, it's just three. So you're not really missing anything by starting with the second one, going to the first one, ending with, Seeds of Love, which is a great album in itself too. I mean, all three of these beginner albums are really good, but you could tell through the trauma, things like that, they're all dealing with things from the lyrics, and it's no surprise that they broke up. You're dealing with a lot of shit, and you're throwing all these things. Hi, looking at you, Pink Floyd, looking at you, Genesis. Jesus Christ. So yeah, I would agree with you. Start with songs from The Big Chair, understand where it's going to go and where they landed, and then go back to
The Hurting and go to this album. I adore The Hurting. So I will also say, as I've said through this entire thing, of course, I'm going to recommend this album. I love it. It's been my thing for many, many years. But I get where this is a struggle for some, but I still recommend it because there are some really strong songs in here. As you said, Joe, and if you can kind of get through some of that and understand and kind of where we're coming from with it, which is these songs are good, but the arrangement's weird.
I didn't say the arrangements are weird. I said the arrangements are bad, Paul.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. The arrangements are bad.
Don't put words in my mouth. I pick my words very specifically.
Yes, you did. All right, fair enough. Sorry, Joe. So yes, as he said there, but The Hurting, Pale Shelter, Memories Fade, Suffer the Children. More often than not, the songs are good. Ideas for Opiates. That's a weird thing. I like weird though. I'm a big Zappa guy. The Prisoner. It's weird. But it's also like just this weird thing that's on this album. So I'm like, all right, when that song comes up, I'm like, here we go. So yeah, I recommend the album. All right, Joe. Let's do some plugs. What's going on with the Joe Down, buddy?
We still got to do Exorcist 2. I'm plotting my next movie pick, but I'm not sure what it is yet.
That's so rough. Oh, God.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exorcist 2 is so bad. And which sucks is Exorcist 3 is a great movie.
Well, Exorcist 3 was written and directed by the guy who did the book, so...
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah,
it's one of the few movies later in life that creep me out. A horror movie. I mean, again, Stephen Dorff is so goddamn good in everything he does. I absolutely think that Exorcist 3 is my favorite of the 3 movies, actually. I think it's the strongest of all 3.
I still like the original. I'm an original guy, but 3 is really good. 2, I'm just... it was apparent nobody wanted to make that movie. And it's just...
No. And it's rough. It's rough. All right. Well, that's cool. All right, Joe. Well, what are we doing next week?
Well, Paul, we've been in a real string of white people music.
Oh, okay. I like this.
You know how I feel about that. Especially with this, with all the arrhythmic white guy, British white guy people
whining and moaning about their tragedies of what it's like to be white in the world. Yeah,
no, it's not even that. It's more like the music where it's just like arrhythmic, dancing like Lane Bennis from Seinfeld with little kicks and jerking all over. So we're gonna get a little bit of the funk on, Paul. We're going back to the 70s.
Okay.
We're doing Inner Visions by Stevie Wonder.
I
need some fucking rhythm after Halloween.
Yeah.
Or Halloween month with Dresden Dolls has just been white people with no rhythm for like a month.
Yeah, this is I'm in. Yep. I'm in. Inner Visions. Yeah, this was a good, this was one of his last albums before he went to that 80, to me, before he started to kind of get into kind of that
quirky 80s stuff that you just praised for an hour and a half.
Yeah, getting the Isn't She Lovely and all that stuff. Fuck you. Yeah. But that was still the late 70s. It's still, but yeah, this was this is good. This is a wonderful album. Isn't Higher Ground on this one?
Dan Marison ripped off Higher Ground, remember?
Dan Marison. Yes. Okay, this is such a good album. Oh, this is great, Joe. Yeah, I love me some funk, baby. You know that. All right, cool. I'm excited for this one. Yeah, we did go through a string of just white people Christmas.
Yeah. Getting real sick of it. Oh. Fuck.
Fair enough. All right, Joe. Well, anything else you want to bring up before we go, sir?
I got nothing. So.
Well, I just want to say thank you to fans. Always reach out to me. Joe's
who's the fan who suggested this?
One of our Canadian listeners. So absolutely awesome.
Good day, mate.
Yeah. Yeah, go put another shrimp on the Barbie, you Canadian fuck. So thank you for that. And it was so again, you're gonna get our realistic take on it. And there's no sugarcoating it there. There are some bad things on this album. But so anytime you guys want to come at me with recommendations, things you want to do, go ahead. I want to thank everyone out there listening. Joe, our Halloween album blew up that morning. It looks like a lot of people are ready for the Halloween Spooktacular. So thank you everyone for listening to that. You guys can reach us on SoundCloud. You guys can reach me on Facebook. It's Paul Muad'Dib. Just look for the guy. You'll know it's me. Or you guys can email us, whatever you want to do there. So I believe our current email is actually our old one, which is Twin Peaks, talkingtwinpeaks@gmail.com. So yeah, shoot us your things there. Otherwise, leave a comment on Facebook. Find us on Facebook, The Pod Down. Find our page, the Joe Down. You can message us right through the Joe Down. So yeah, absolutely. And we've seen a lot of traffic going to the Joe Down as well. So Joe, this has it's been great, man. It's been really, really fun. I'm excited for Stevie Wonder. All right, Joe. Well, if that's all there is to it, do you want to take us out?
No.
This has been Rate That Album
Awesome.
with Paul Muad'Dib and Joe Fremming. Thank you for listening.